All right, so this is the second lecture on labor unions, and this is for Wednesday, November 4th. Now, if you were with us yesterday or if you watched the video for yesterday, we started discussing unionization and how the rapid change in the industrial age brought about changes that needed to happen within labor as well, just like we saw changes that needed to happen in politics, changes that needed to happen within industry itself, and of course it's going to have to happen in labor because things are happening rapidly and they're beginning to see things that need to be done differently, and so workers will unionize to bring about those changes. And so whether it's working conditions or wages or working hours or child labor, unions are going to play a role in bringing that about. Some of the strategies, we began talking about some of the strategies yesterday that were used to push these industrialists towards change. Because again, industrialists were a little hesitant towards change. I should say little. Some were a lot more hesitant towards change than others. We mentioned Henry Ford yesterday being a good example of somebody who was a little more proactive, paying his workers a decent wage. He already introduced that 8-hour workday, and so forth. So some were really good. Others were a lot more difficult to work with, again because they were more focused on the money, but they were also concerned about, hey, we've just figured out how to make money. If we give in to labor, how is that going to impact? And so it did create a little anxiety and a resistance, and not just resistance to messing with the system, but also resistance to labor that appeared to be influenced heavily by socialism and other economic systems that were really shunned at this time in America, where capitalism truly is viewed in a very positive way. So some of the labor strategies were going on strike, as we see here, and picketing. We also talked about boycotts yesterday and voluntarily stopping consumption of products in order to put economic pressure on someone to get them to change. We also talked about legislation, and I gave the example here of getting government to stop the immigration of Chinese into the United States, because the Chinese were always willing to work for lower wages, and that would push a lot of whites out of jobs. And another thing that labor did was it definitely pushed government to use legislation to get things passed that were beneficial, whether it was immigration or ending child labor or regulating working hours or working with wages or things like that. Those would all be examples of the use of legislation to get labor needs met. All right, so I'm hoping to pick up where I left off here. I paused it for a second so I could get the titles up there. So anyway, labor strategies, and one of those labor strategies was definitely the use of violence, and I talked about the Pullman strike. Another picture I have coming up here is from the Haymarket riot. This was in Chicago, in Haymarket Square, Chicago, where the workers were demonstrating for an 8-hour day. A bomb goes off. Several police are killed. A number of people are wounded. People going back think that this was actually the result of an anarchist involved here. But again, using violence, specifically targeting police officers, with an attempt to gain their demands is what we see going on here. Things that I'm not going to have pictures for, but other ones that you may want to consider looking at. One is the Molly Maguire coal miners in Pennsylvania, specifically amongst the Irish American coal miners, they would use kidnapping and other crimes to try to press these coal industrialists to give in to better working conditions and better pay. Another one is the Homestead strike, where there was a lockout and a lockout strike. And what happened was the strikers and private security guards went into a huge battle with each other at the it's called the Battle of Blair Mountain, and in Homestead, Pennsylvania, with steel workers primarily working for Carnegie Steel, and they were battling with the security agents who weren't who were locking them out during the strike, and so they fought each other, and this created a huge setback for the union, because it really, again, all these things make the unions look bad, and they don't really help the unions at all. So violence was all right. So here we are back again. Police as an arm of the state. What was going on here? And I'm going to have you do an FYI on this, so I'm not going to go into detail. I actually want you to spend some time on your own, but looking into the Pinkertons. And I think what you're going to find is these are some men that got together, especially after the Civil War, and finally had some talents that they were going to use to help industrialists control labor. If it wasn't the Pinkertons or the police, they definitely had access to the Army. You'll see the Army used a number of times, but again, it just kind of goes to show that the industrialists had the money to pay for power to keep labor in check. And so even though there's a lot of violence that goes on, labor is kept in check by these industrialists and those that they hire, basically to control them. So I'm going to let you guys do an FYI on that, and we'll talk about this more tomorrow. All right, we're going to move on. All right. So labor ideology is basically the philosophy, the driving ideology behind labor. It explains why they're doing what they're doing, and what the end game is in this. We'll start with Karl Marx. Karl Marx was a German economist from Germany, and he is going to write a book called Das Kapital, DAS, and then capital with a K. And in this book that he writes, he basically shares his thoughts on production, and basically he says this: the labor required to produce a product is the true mark of its value. Okay, so listen to that again. The labor required to produce a product is the true mark of its value. So basically what Karl Marx is saying is that the value held in a product, let's say that, for example, you're making a coat, okay? The value of that coat is not in the material. The value in the coat is not in the design. The value of the coat is not in something that the factory provides, but the value of that coat is in the work, okay? The person doing the work. So these coats are being made, they're getting shipped out, and they're getting sold, and they're getting sold for, say, $20 a piece. Karl Marx would say then that the profit made from that coat does not belong to the industrialist. Okay? He would say that the profits made from that coat don't belong to the person who owns the factory because they have nothing to do with the coat. He would say that the profits from the coat belong to the worker because they're the ones that gave the coat value. So it's this idea that the labor, the effort that went into making the coat gives it its value, nothing else. Something else that Karl Marx claims in his book is that history is a constant struggle between the worker and the industrialist. And so basically Karl Marx will look at the history of the world or history of anything, and he'll say that history primarily is the story, the narrative of history is the story of a struggle between workers and owners, workers and the industrialists, or the haves and the have-nots. And so he would propose then that in order to eliminate this struggle that is seen, that we need to have a single class society, and that single class would be the working class. So we need to get rid of industrialists, we need to get rid of the wealthy, and basically everybody needs to become a worker. And then we would have a society that's completely centered around the needs and the conditions of the worker. Basically, he's promoting a utopia. Okay, he's promoting the idea that we can create a perfect society by creating a single class social system. And of course, that's going to all center around the laborer. And of course, where's the conflict going to be if everybody is the same? If everybody's the same class, there's no conflict. And of course, that's how he figures on eliminating the conflict. Now, there is a flaw in Marxism. I probably shouldn't say a flaw, but there are probably several. But here is the big flaw. And that is, the big flaw is Marx assumes everybody wants the same thing out of society. Okay, I think everybody would be happy with a single class system if everybody wanted the same thing. Okay, so basically, if everybody wants the same thing, you're also assuming then that most people are ambitionless. Okay, that nobody has ambitions beyond what everybody else wants. Okay, one in which everybody is satisfied when everybody has the same. I think that that's the major flaw, because I think when you look at human nature and you look around even the classroom here, you'll see that everybody has a different set of ambitions, and everybody has a different set of goals, and even though everybody would like to see society succeed, everybody has a different way of participating in that society to make it successful. So again, utopia, you're going to see this utopian theme frequently throughout these labor ideologies, and Marxism is no different than the others. And just so you understand, Marxism is the forerunner of both socialism and communism. And so you will see both communist and socialist ideologies kind of branch off from Marx's writings. Speaking of socialism, here we have, you can see two people struggling over a bag of cash there, but down in the bottom left you see a picture of Eugene Debs. He was probably one of the most well-known socialists in American history. He helped organize unions. He ran for president 5 times on the Socialist Party, which you can see the emblem of the Socialist Party there on the right, which does have a presidential candidate almost every year in the election. In fact, this year, if Bernie Sanders is successful at all, you're going to have a socialist in the Democratic Party running for president, who's now seeking that, and he's a self-proclaimed socialist. He's not in the closet one. But socialism here, the idea here is you have a state-controlled economic system that distributes resources according to need. Okay, so it's a state-controlled economic system that distributes resources according to need. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that the government runs all factories and all industries and things like that. Industry can still be privately owned. However, the government plays a key role in determining what is needed. And so they can regulate or they can legislate how certain industries will operate, what certain industries will do and not do. And so you have here a government that believes it should take an active role in the economic system. And the primary purpose for that, the primary purpose for a socialist government to get involved, is for the redistribution of wealth. And of course, a major portion of that wealth redistribution is going to the working class. And again, the idea here is to lift up the working class and try to narrow that gap between the haves and the have-nots. Maybe not necessarily have a single class structure, but definitely try to eliminate it so that there are fewer classes, or so that the classes are a lot closer together than they currently are. Now, again, a flaw. I have to mention the flaws with these systems. I mean, it all sounds good: redistribution of wealth, making sure everybody has something, and especially the workers. And I mean, all that can sound good, but the flaw is who determines need. Well, we just said that in this system, the state determines need. And I think you have to ask the question, is the state the best determiner of what is truly needed by the people? So what you're assuming is that this large central bureaucratic government will always be able to have the pulse of the people and know exactly what they need. Now, when you think about the United States, 330 million people, is it possible for a central government to have the pulse of the people to know exactly what they need? And I think the answer to that is kind of like, that's kind of hard to tell. I mean, can 435 people, or I should say 535 people in Washington, D.C., know the pulse of 330 million? When you think of it that way, it's kind of like, I don't know that they do. I don't know that they can. And so here you have the flaw is that you have a state trying to determine need, but possibly is not always in the best position to determine that, because they could base need off of their own needs, or they could base need off of more money that they're going to get, or something that is greedy, and it really doesn't help the people, but it definitely helps their pocketbook. And at the same time, it has a similar flaw as Marxism does, and that is, again, it also assumes that the people are ambitionless and willing to adopt the state's definition of standard of living. In other words, if the state determines this is your need, then you're also assuming then that the people automatically are willing to cave in and say, oh yeah, that's exactly what I need, as opposed to having ambitions and desires and dreams for more. So again, that would be another flaw, and that is the assumption of an ambitionless population. And then finally, here as far, well, I shouldn't say finally, there's two more here really. Here you see two cartoons. One is the European anarchist who's holding a bomb next to the Statue of Liberty, and there were a lot of immigrants coming to the United States that had anarchist ideology that was of some concern. So a lot of people concerned about that. And of course the other one is talking about killing the law, no God, down with capital, destroy all property, kill the police, that sort of thing. And basically an anarchist is someone who desires to overthrow the government because they believe that once all authority is gone, that you can create a utopian society. As long as there's government, as long as there's authority, you'll never be able to establish a utopia. So they are very intolerant. Basically, when you get down to the nuts and bolts of it, they are intolerant of any authority. And anarchists, more than any others, when it comes to ideology, believes in the use of violence to achieve their goals. So they want a free society of authority, but they want to do it with violence. And so it does make you skeptical about whether, once authority is all gone, then who will curb the violence. So I don't know that anybody really believes that anarchy can be curbed of violence. But anyway, they, like I said, more than any other ideology, they believe in the use of violence to achieve their goals. And of course, their main goal is to eliminate all authority so that utopia can be established. Now, we've been mentioning utopia here a number of times, and so here we are on our utopia page. And basically, a utopia is a society in which everyone works for the common welfare of everybody else. And so it's a society, and I'll say that one more time, a society in which everyone works for the common welfare of everyone else. And this is the ultimate goal of socialism, Marxism, communism, anarchy, and that is the idea that we can create a perfect society. We can get to a point where we have eliminated all conflict, whether that's authority or whether that's the elite industrialists and bankers and so forth, and we have this single class society, the worker. And when it's just the workers, we have a society now in which everybody is interested in everybody else's common good. And so that's the whole idea of utopia. Okay? Everybody is at peace with everybody else because there's only one single class. Nobody has any needs or wants because everybody has the exact same thing. And therefore everybody's happy. And again, we have to point out the flaw here. Okay? A couple of things. Okay? This, again, is based on the assumption that men have no ambition. Okay? Again, basically, their only ambition is for the welfare of everybody else. And that's a pretty strong assumption to assume that man can get to a point where his only concern is the benefit of everyone else. I'm pretty sure that right now we're still living in a society where everybody's still looking out for themselves. And it also assumes that men are naturally good. Okay, that men can once again achieve this natural goodness, that he is not born evil, that he is not born with wickedness, that man is born good and he can tap into that. And once he's tapped into that, then we will see a perfect society from that. So to me, utopia is a pipe dream. Okay, it really honestly is. It's a pipe dream. It's something that will never be achieved. Because as long as there's evil in the world, as long as men have desires that go beyond others and are unwilling to just give in to the state and say, hey, I'll let the government tell me what is best for me or not. As long as there are men who are doing that, you'll never see utopia. And so I think that since man is not naturally good, and since man naturally has his own desires and his own goals he wants to achieve, I don't think we're ever going to see utopia. So the socialists, the communists, the Marxists will constantly see failures, just like you saw the fall of the Soviet Union, just as you see China caving into capitalist markets. You will constantly see these socialist and communist countries failing over and over and over again because it's unachievable. All right, so those are the basics when it comes to ideology that's driving labor, that's driving these things. and we'll come back together on Thursday, kind of review all this stuff, and do expect a notes quiz Friday. Okay, so we'll make sure everybody gets caught up tomorrow, and then notes quiz Friday, and also make sure you're working on the FYI. We're going to talk about the Pinkertons tomorrow, and I just want to hear what everybody has to say. All right, thank you.